Good day, everybody. Michael Campana here for our April version of our AWRA monthly webinar. We have a twofer today. We've got a great team going. Bill Alley and Rosemarie Alley will be talking about their recent book, High and Dry, Meeting the Challenges of the World's Growing Dependence on Groundwater. So got something in store for you today. Don't forget, this Saturday is Earth Day. Celebrate the way you wish to. And a couple of tips for participating in the webinar. We encourage your questions, and what you need to do is you essentially use kind of like an email thing to send to us. Open the question box on your little control panel, and then just type your question in the box and make sure you hit send. We'd appreciate that you be concise so that we don't have to wade through the 3 paragraphs to find the question. We will ask Bill and Rosemarie the questions at the end of their webinar, so you won't be asking them directly. I would also note that the webinar recording, it is being recorded now, and the PowerPoint as a PDF will be made available to participants within a week. You must have a Dropbox account, which is free, by the way, to access them. If you don't have a Dropbox account, you won't be able to view the entirety of the webinar. So the schedule, pretty simple. 1 o'clock Eastern Time, I start. 1:05, Bill and Rosemarie will have the floor for about 40 minutes, and then we'll start Q&A at 45 minutes past the hour. One thing we will do is we do have the capability to go past the 2 p.m. or 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time end time for a few minutes. So if we have a backlog of questions, Bill and Rosemarie have consented to stay on, and we will keep them on. And right at the top of this slide, you can see that you can purchase their book at this website, the URL given. I will send that around in your chat box, and if you use the code YEH20, you will get 25% off. That URL links directly to the Yale University Press website for Bill and Rosemarie's book, so you'll be able to get 25% off the list price. And we also want to thank our sponsors, MWH, which is a part of Stantec. They provide the platform for us, and I especially want to thank Lisa Butler of MWH in the Sacramento office for facilitating this. Beautiful picture here. We've been commenting about what a great picture this is. No, this is not a professional photograph. They're in near Joshua Tree National Monument in Southern California, east of San Diego, where they live, and someone came by and snapped a picture. Bill is wearing his USGS t-shirt. He was formerly the director of, or pardon me, the office of the chief of the Office of Groundwater for a number of years. Rosemarie is a longtime science writer, educator, and communicator, so between the two of them, they're quite a cogent team when it comes to writing books. You're probably wondering what that other book is there, or that thing that says Too Hot to Touch. That was actually the first book that they wrote as a team, and it was put out about 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago. I think it's Cambridge University Press. And if you have any interest in high-level nuclear waste and some of the issues surrounding it, and by the way, it's an issue that is not going away despite what some may say, you should read this book. It's extremely well written, just like High and Dry, and as someone who was involved in the nuclear waste industry, I guess, during the 80s, I read this, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know about. So again, that's my plug. I'm not getting a residual or anything like that. And there I am with my usual Got Water t-shirt. There's Christine. And how about our future webinars? My gosh, next month we're sticking with groundwater. Sharon B. Megdal, the groundwater guru or goddess, or actually groundwater governance goddess from University of Arizona, will be talking about groundwater governance and management. And then in June, Sarah Porterfield, University of Colorado, takes us back to the American Nile, Colorado River. We heard John Fleck talk about that in January. Sarah's going to pick up and take us in a new direction. IWRM in July, Anna Seta-Yobe from University of California, Berkeley is going to talk about the EU Floods Directive. and what the U.S. can learn about that. That's going to be a wonderful talk, just like all the others. And we go back, flood risk, California Central Valley under climate change. We've got a quadruple header for you, for folks talking about what's going on in California with the Central Valley. And then we go to groundwater droughts in September, and a tale from a few aquifers. That's going to be quite fascinating, I think. And then finally, we're scheduling an October webinar. We don't have it done quite yet, and that'll probably be our final one for 2017. And we're actually scheduling for 2018. So if you have a topic, or you know of someone who has a topic that would be of interest to a wide range of water professionals, you can email me at that email address, aquedoc@awra.org. Give me the speaker's name, contact information, topic, and why you think it's important. It doesn't have to be a mini thesis that you have to write. So, without any further ado, we're going to take you over to Bill and Rosemarie, and they're going to start on high and dry. So, folks, it's going to be all yours.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We want to thank, let me get this pulled up here first. Okay, we want to thank AWRA for hosting us and giving us a chance to get the word out about our book, and it's nice that you did the same thing for John Fleck and his book. I also want to recognize Mike's role here. Mike was, he reviewed the proposal and also reviewed the completed draft and gave us a lot of great input. So thanks, Mike. As Mike mentioned, this is a team project between myself and my wife, Rosemarie. And so I'm gonna turn it over to her for the first part, and then I'll do part two.
Okay. I want to just start off by taking a minute and talking about why we wrote the book. Groundwater is the neglected child of the water world, out of sight, out of mind, and surface water gets pretty much all the attention. So we wrote High and Dry to just try to generate more attention on this very overlooked, very precious resource. We also worked really hard to make this an interesting read, as well as a very informative read, so that we attempt to reach a broader audience. And we also didn't want to write just another crisis book. So we've included stories of people and groups who are doing some really tremendous work in groundwater issues. Okay, so I'm going to start with the big picture. Greater than 95% of the world's unfrozen fresh water is groundwater, which sounds like we've got it made. But the problem is this is misleading. Much of the Earth's groundwater is too deep or otherwise uneconomical to pump. Much of it you can't pump very much at all, or you're going to have problems like land subsidence or serious stream flow depletion. And an increasing problem because of human impacts is that it's just too contaminated for use. Half the world's drinking water comes from groundwater. Most people in rural areas are hugely, or maybe most of them are actually completely dependent on groundwater for their water supply. And also many of the world's cities depend in large or completely on groundwater. A few examples, Bangkok, Copenhagen, Mexico City, very diverse cities, but are all heavily dependent on this resource. 44% of global food production comes from groundwater, you know, you just get more crop for your drop from groundwater irrigation because you're no longer dependent on the capriciousness of rain. Groundwater has also played a major role in preventing the cycles of mass starvation that used to occur in developing countries such as India. Groundwater is a critical factor in economic growth, and many ecosystems depend on groundwater for their existence. Examples are groundwater-fed streams and lakes, wetlands, caves and karst systems, springs, and coastal areas. And groundwater also sustains moderates temperatures for aquatic life, as well as sustaining base flow. Okay, so this is a simplified map of the world's aquifers. The darkest regions show the most productive aquifer systems. But even in areas shown with little or no groundwater, local aquifers may be important for rural supplies. So basically, groundwater is distributed around the world in greater or lesser amounts, but in most places it's accessible. And this is why groundwater is referred to as a democratic resource. Unlike surface water, where people who live near a stream or canal have had a distinct advantage. Okay, so these 5 countries here account for 60% of the world's groundwater use. And as you can see, India pumps more than twice the amount pumped in the US or China, which are both in the number 2 slot. To give you an idea of how much groundwater India pumps each year, it's enough water to fill an 18-inch diameter pipe to the moon and back 2,000 times. So India has serious problems with groundwater overdraft and depletion, which Bill will talk about a little bit in a few minutes. And then, go ahead. Then global groundwater depletion is what we're looking at here. Starting in the western US, you can see that there's a lot of depletion going down into Mexico. There's also groundwater depletion problems in southern Europe and North Africa. And if you notice the lack of groundwater depletion in sub-Saharan Africa, except for the very southern part, there's a little bit down there. Then we get to the Middle East where things get really interesting. India and Pakistan are off the charts. And finally, up there on the North China Plain, you can see there's a real problem with depletion. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about 3 countries and look at their groundwater management practices, starting with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has no permanent rivers or lakes and very little rainfall. And as a result, the country is completely dependent on groundwater, with most of it being non-renewable. The Saudi desert sits on top of one of the oldest and largest aquifers in the world. 50 years ago, it contained enough water to fill Lake Erie. But in the early 1980s, the Saudi government began to subsidize farmers to grow wheat and allow them to pump as much groundwater as they wanted. The goal was to become self-sufficient in wheat production. But by 2006, Saudi Arabia was the 6th largest exporter of wheat in the world, which sounds totally crazy. And looking at this picture here, it looks totally crazy. In the past few years, they've stopped growing wheat because finally, they were getting concerned about depleting their scarce water resources. But wheat is only part of their problem.
Rosemary? Bill?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks. We seem to be having some technical difficulties here. Bear with us for a few moments. We will figure out what's going on. Hold on, please. Bill? Rosemary?
No.
Hello? Michael, is that you?
Yeah, they lost connection. I mean, I'm not getting anything. I'm trying to contact them right now. So
okay, thank you.
Folks,
all
hang
right,
on.
Bear with us, folks. We're trying to get Bill and Rosemary back on. Thank you for your patience.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, just got you.
I don't know what happened, but we switched to the phone. I'm going to hand the phone to Rosemary, and she'll just continue.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. Sorry, folks.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're just going to continue this way. Yeah. No. So let me finish Saudi Arabia here. At any rate, this slide, you can see that this looks pretty crazy. So anyway, they've shut down their wheat growing. But they still have a very large fruit and vegetable industry, as well as a thriving meat and dairy industry. Saudi Arabia is actually.
Sorry to interrupt you. This is Christine. We actually don't see your slides, though.
Yeah.
You don't see the slides?
No.
Your voice is, audio is fine. No.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see.
Not showing anything.
Huh. From our screen, it looks like the slide is up. Let's see.
Hold on a second. Let me pull it back. Oh, there it is.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Still, I'm going to finish Saudi Arabia. Yeah. Can you see the slide now?
Yeah.
We can, and we can hear you perfectly.
And you can hear me. Okay. So we're gonna finally, hopefully, let's cross our fingers, but let's proceed. So at any rate, Saudi Arabia has serious problems here, and now they are having to rely on expensive desalination just to provide drinking water to its growing population. And on top of this, they've started buying land in other countries to grow their fodder for this cattle industry they've got going. For an example, they recently bought a large piece of land in Arizona for this purpose. So this is in a part of the state where there's virtually no regulations on how much groundwater you can pump. So growing alfalfa in the United States and shipping it back to Saudi Arabia is really shipping virtual water to a country that has foolishly spent its water savings and is now dipping into our groundwater piggy bank. Okay, so Saudi Arabia is one of the worst examples of groundwater overdraft and mismanagement, where they've depleted a large part of their groundwater supply. Now I'm going to talk about Sub-Saharan Africa, where groundwater is underutilized. The issues in the Sub-Sahara are access and water quality. This is a place where developing groundwater could make a major difference in people's lives. As you can see in this photo, these school kids aren't taking water for granted. Clean water for drinking and washing hands is critical to the lives and well-being of children like these. These kids are really fortunate to have clean water. Many schools in the Sub-Sahara don't. Only around 16% of Sub-Saharans have potable water piped into their homes. A growing number of villages have a communal well, but a lot of these wells have a short lifespan because the well-intentioned people who came to the village and drilled the well didn't train the villagers in maintenance.
And so, you know, usually not too long down the road or sooner or later, the well breaks down and they're back where they started, which is buying expensive water or women going out, finding water and hauling it home. This water walk is a global problem, but it's most severe in sub-Saharan Africa. Fortunately, today the need to develop professional standards and build local capacity is improving thanks to various groups, and we look at some of them in our book. Next is Denmark. Denmark has one of the world's most exemplary groundwater management programs. All of their drinking water comes from groundwater, and about 2/3 of the country's land area is devoted to agriculture. So along with concerns about fertilizer and pesticide, some 28 million pigs are raised in Denmark each year. Now this is a country with 5.5 million people, so they have a major manure challenge on top of the rest of it. In 1951, the government began a national network for monitoring groundwater levels. And then in the late 1980s, they started monitoring groundwater quality. These long-term data have provided a solid foundation. And so in 1995, they launched a groundwater protection initiative. As shown in the darker blue areas, about 40% of the country is designated as particularly valuable for groundwater production. In these areas, they undertook an ambitious hydrogeological mapping program to produce an accurate picture of aquifers and their vulnerability to contamination. The program is remarkable in how it combines monitoring, borehole information, geologic mapping, and advanced airborne geophysical methods as shown in the slide on the right, along with a sophisticated set of modeling tools. All data and interpretations are stored in a national database, and anyone can access this for free of charge. So this is a very forward-looking, proactive, user-friendly program in Denmark. The national mapping program was completed in 2015, and it provides key information for establishing groundwater protection zones and regulating land use to prevent groundwater contamination. The program was funded, by the way, by a tax on water use that cost about $15 a year per family. So whether they know it or not, they're getting their money's worth out of that investment. Fortunately, Denmark isn't the only place in the world that's responsibly managing its groundwater. Germany and the Netherlands also get high marks. Bangkok has dealt with a serious subsidence problem and is largely getting it under control. In the United States, Arizona's 1980 Groundwater Management Act brought groundwater back from the brink in some critical parts of the state. California has a mixed bag with serious groundwater depletion in parts of the state, such as the San Joaquin Valley. But the Santa Clara Valley in Orange County have very advanced groundwater management programs. So that's my part here. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Okay, here we go.
Okay, thanks, Rosemary. Okay, so I'm going to continue along the lines actually that Rosemary was talking about, which is kind of give you an idea of just how varied aquifers can be, and also in terms of how people think about them. So lots of times people think of groundwater as just a basically like a bathtub. So anybody that pumps out of that bathtub essentially is drawing down the water for everybody else. Alternatively, you can think of it as more like an egg carton, where your pumping is actually affecting your future more and less your neighbors. And sort of the second scenario drives people to start thinking about managing their groundwater resources for future generations and for their own benefit. Now, Rosemary mentioned India as the #1 pumping groundwater country. This is a GRACE shot. I think this was the first major article that came out of the GRACE satellite data. The GRACE satellite data, is, I think most people know, it is a couple of satellites that are flying around Earth, and they're measuring essentially changes in gravity pull, and most of that change is going to come from changes in the total water content. Then if you can subtract out soil moisture and surface water and snow and ice, you have an estimate of changes in groundwater depletion. So it gives you a crude estimate, but over a very large area as shown there. And so a lot of people think of India as groundwater depletion is occurring mostly in the northwestern part of the country, which is true to some extent. although it's interesting, some of that area is actually had a long period of canal drain of surface water irrigation and leaking canals that build up the groundwater supply there, and other parts they're basically taking from the natural stocks. But it's not just the northwest part of India. This is a map of hydrogeological provinces of India, and as you can see, much of peninsular India is made up of basalts or Precambrian basement rocks, which have very low storage capacity for groundwater. And so this area also doesn't have a lot of rainfall, and it's very dependent on the vagaries of monsoons. Just today, actually, I read that Hyderabad, it's not shown on the map there, but it's kind of in the center of the peninsular India, which is the technical industry hub of India, has banned digging any further bore wells because of concerns about groundwater depletion. Interestingly, though, they also cited that 99% of the wells that are drilled there are done without proper permission, so I'm not sure how much effect that'll actually have. But then if we look in northeastern India, just to show you some of the differences here, the major issue there, up there in West Bengal and then into Bangladesh, is arsenic. And as shown in this photograph here, is you can see those wells are painted green. So what happened in West Bengal and Bangladesh is, which has come to be known as the largest poisoning of a population in history, was they made a huge switch from surface water, which was highly had lots and lots of pathogens in it, lots of disease arising, to shallow boreholes, but nobody tested for arsenic. It turns out there's a lot of arsenic in the groundwater. And so they've gone through and really tested, I think maybe even millions of wells, and painted them either green or red, depending on whether or not they're safe or not compared to the World Health Drinking Water Guideline of 10 ppb arsenic. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people sort of ignore that too. That's their water supply, and if it's red, they still continue to drink the water. So it's a continuing problem in that country. So we have water depletion, but also water quality issues in India. Rosemary already mentioned the case of non-renewable groundwater, so this is kind of the extreme end. It's a map of Libya there. So Libya has more non-renewable groundwater than any other country, certainly in Africa, but also probably the world. And it's all in the southern part of the state, away from the population, which is all up near the coast. And so Muammar Gaddafi many years ago was going to create what he called the eighth wonder of the world, also known as the Great Man-Made River. It's not a river, it's a pipe, and so that you can see a part of the Great Man-Made River there on the right-hand side, and you can see sort of the plans on the left-hand side on the map. And they've brought a lot of water to the north, pumping their groundwater, their non-renewable groundwater resource. Like Saudi Arabia, Libya is using a lot of that water for, first of all, they supplied it to people, and it made a huge difference in people's public supply. But they're also using it to grow at subsidized prices to grow wheat, oats, corn, and even crops like almonds and grapes. So the government, at least the former government, claimed that the water could last several thousands of years. Others aren't so sure. Other estimates say that the exploitable groundwater reserves are maybe 60 to 100 years at the present rate. So one thing about non-renewable groundwater is it's not subject to the vagaries or to fluctuations of climate or to man-made climate change. But that's not the case at the other end of the spectrum, and a good example there is the Edwards Aquifer, which is shown the spring there, Comal Springs, which is a karst aquifer, and it issues a lot of its water is discharged in two primary springs that also happen to have endangered species in them. This aquifer is climatically driven enough that they actually show on TV on the right-hand side, which is kind of a great way to get people aware of their aquifers, to have it on the nightly news, the status of a particular index well. Now, the Edwards is interesting in that it's well regulated, largely in response to some endangered species that exist in the springs, but actually the endangered species regulations for the endangered species have driven sufficient management of that water resource that they've been able to weather some very severe droughts in Texas in recent years. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. Then the other kind of aquifer is the Artesian or confined aquifers. And a famous one is the Great Artesian Basin there, shown on the map in the left in Australia. This underlies about a fifth of the Australian landmass, and is basically about 10,000 feet thick in a sequence of sandstones and shales. There's possibly enough water in this aquifer to meet Australia's needs for 1,500 years if you could actually get it all. And it discharges again, it discharges through a lot of springs actually, which are a natural outlet. And actually, for thousands of years, Australia's indigenous people have relied on these springs for their water supply, and they also sustain a lot of unique flora and fauna. In beginning, actually early in the 1900s, they began to put in artesian wells, and you can see a flowing artesian well there on the right-hand side, and primarily for grazing. So they were opening up large tracts of grazing country. The problem was that more than 95% of the water that was flowing from these wells was lost to evaporation and seepage. So they went through, by maybe 1990 or so, more than 1,000 of these natural springs, and at least a third of the artesian boreholes had ceased flowing. But in 1989, they began an effort to reverse this situation, and they've actually capped more than 1,000 boreholes, and they've done, I think, something like 15,000 miles of these open drains have been converted to pipe. So they've been able to save a lot of water and actually take actions to try to reduce this waste, essentially, of their valuable resource. Arizona, mentioned already, is another case, and the map on the left shows the active management areas. And some of those, like the Phoenix down to the Tucson, have a lot of surface water. So this is another example of a very different situation in which Rosemary already mentioned, but it's the combination of the availability of surface water and an active management program that has really made the difference in those areas. And once you get outside those areas, the story, as I'll show you in a moment, is very different. And there's actually a very interesting story we tell about how this came about, the bringing together the Central Arizona Project and this Groundwater Management Act in Arizona. So if we look, this is just a graph. Think of it as an average water level graph for the past few decades, of which the last few have been very dry. And the top of the graph shows these active management areas. And so you can see, thanks to the management practices that were in place, a lot of managed aquifer recharge, they've been able to stabilize their groundwater levels or even bring them back up during this period. Whereas if you step outside the AMAs, then you see an entirely different situation with declines, and it kind of looks like the South San Joaquin Valley in California, actually, with just a steady decline with periodic up increases, but mostly down. Okay, so another aspect is our transboundary aquifers, and so these create, and there are additional challenges for managing groundwater resource, and there's several hundred of these that have been identified, mostly in the last decade or two, around the world. They underlie almost every non-island country, but different from surface water, where there's hundreds of treaties for international river basins, there's only a handful of agreements between countries for these transboundary aquifers. So the most well-known in terms of management is an aquifer shared near Lake Geneva between France and Switzerland. Not exactly two countries that have problems getting along, and that's been going on for decades, and it's mostly centered on the management of a artificial recharge scheme that the two countries together on. The only other one really where there's a management agreement of sorts is recently between Saudi Arabia and Jordan, where they've agreed to restrict groundwater pumping in certain areas of a shared resource. So transboundary aquifers present another whole interesting aspect of groundwater. Okay, so second theme we talked about a lot, and actually your next webinar, AWRA webinar, is going to focus on groundwater governance. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples of the top-down versus bottom-up approach to groundwater governance. So the picture here you see is the oldest democratic institution in Europe. It's the water jury of Valencia, and what you see there, it's been meeting for centuries every Thursday at noon at the entrance to this cathedral. And these judges shown in the circle there are elected by farmers, and they resolve disputes right out there in the open regarding the surface water irrigation system. And so it must work if it's been going on for this long. In contrast, we have what we might call hydrologic insubordination when it comes to groundwater. This is a picture of the La Mancha region of Spain. So if you may recall, La Mancha is where was immortalized by the home of Don Quixote, who was fighting windmills, and those windmills are a clue of its agrarian history, if you will, but growing lots of different kinds of grains and so forth. So this is a dried up wetland. This area is actually important to migratory birds, and it's even declared a biosphere reserve by UNESCO, who's continually threatening to stop because of the groundwater pumping has drawn down water levels and dried up the area. So a basin authority was formed and basically said the basin's in overdraft, no more wells, and pumping quotas were established on the remaining wells. Well, this was completely ignored by the farmers because it came down from on high, and then they actually brought a large number of these owners of illegal wells to court, and the farmers then basically convinced the federal government to fire the president of the Basin Authority and again ignore the rules. So they've had a heck of a time trying to regulate groundwater in this region, and it's a classic case that top-down management usually sets up resistance among stakeholders, and there's no possibility of getting entrenched groundwater users on board if they aren't actively involved in the decision-making process. At the same time, if you look at all these stories across the world, usually there has to be some sort of external force to achieve changes in accountability. So you kind of have to have the mix. So as our final example, we'll turn back to Arizona and the San Pedro River, which is shown on the right-hand side there. And on the left-hand side is shown the city of Sierra Vista. So you have Sierra Vista and Fort Huachuca. Again, this is a major riparian area, birding paradise. The major issue for many years now has been the effects of pumping by Sierra Vista and Fort Huachuca on the San Pedro. And for a long time, you couldn't get people to agree on whether there was even any effect of that pumping on rivers, despite models that showed that there definitely was. And eventually, the Upper San Pedro Partnership was formed. And sometime around 1999, they began essentially a long-term collaborative modeling project where USGS was doing the modeling, but they were basically engaged at each step of the way with this San Pedro partnership, so that through continual engagement, and this took place over 7 years, I think, by the time they were done, everybody understood and, more importantly, actually trusted the model. So you had buy-in on this model, which was then used to develop some management schemes. I won't go into it here, but we talked a lot about sort of this. There was also a citizen scientist part of this effort, which involved getting people. Nature Conservancy was heavily involved in getting people out on an annual basis and mapping wet-dry areas from year to year, and actually mixing mixing people who from different perspectives, so environmentalists maybe, and the city council member as part of these teams, and they were actually able to build a lot of rapport, I think, through that unique citizen science. So there was also an external force in the sense that the area was going to lose Fort Huachuca unless they got their pumping under control. So I think that's a very good example of where actions have been able to be taken to try to deal with a major groundwater issue. So we'll end with that as a positive note, and I think we can take some questions now. Mike?
Great. Thanks very much, Bill and Rosemary. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. I can fish them out here. First question comes from, excuse me, comes from Mike, not me, and he's curious because in terms of groundwater depletion, Central Florida is often not shown as being an area of groundwater depletion, and yet he notes that they do have significant problems with declining rivers and lake levels. And is there some reason for this? Is it just overlooked, or is it just too small of an area to show up on some of those maps? So
yeah, that's an interesting question. It's actually interesting because a lot of the like the stuff from the GRACE satellite picks up on where you actually have, you know, major volume of depletion. And so Florida, which has a lot of water moving through the system, certainly has its share of issues, and certainly the connection to lakes has been a big issue in Florida. And so it shows that you have to look at more than just depletion and also look at capture. In other words, the effects of pumping on surface water and groundwater resources, which is oftentimes the sort of the driving force for trying to get your groundwater pumping under control.
Okay. Next question is, and I know the two of you discussed this on your book on pages 165, 166, but could you say something about what Bangkok, what's going on in Bangkok, Thailand, with respect to subsidence and
Sure. So Bangkok's an interesting story. Actually, one of the advantages of Bangkok is that they have a long history of monitoring, and so they were able to use that information to help guide them. They have a lot of subsidence issues there. They're basically pulling water out of again a sequence of confined and unconfined shales, clays, which are leading to subsidence. They have a couple advantages. One is they have a very thick clay at the top, so you can't have too many people. It wasn't so easy to drill a well into, and so they had a limited number of pumpers to deal with. They put in a lot of rules about permitting and how much you could pump and how much you were going to, and they put in fees, and gradually managed. I think they peaked about 2,000 in central Bangkok in terms of their pumping. They had a lot. They got the industry folks. A lot of pumping was for industry under control first. There were a lot of private or municipal, I mean, but then there were a lot of private entities. Took them a little longer to get those under control, and it's not completely solved because it's kind of migrated some, but they've definitely made some strides in their subsidence, trying to get it under control.
That's great. Okay. Next one. USGS, Bill's old stomping grounds, working on the assessment of brackish groundwater in the United States, and this is from Zuping Sheng in El Paso. Wonders if you have any comments on the potential for future water supplies with respect to brackish groundwater. And I'm sure, as you know, El Paso Water Utilities is currently operating an inland desal plant using brackish groundwater as the source. So anyway.
Yeah, we talked about that. You know, Texas has a huge amount of brackish groundwater, so does New Mexico for that matter. And they have a lot of interest in developing it. you know, it depends. If it's isolated, then you're mining a resource, and if it's not, then you got to worry about the connection of the brackish water to surface water supplies. I think that's, as Rosemary mentioned at the outset, the 95% of the world's non-frozen fresh water is groundwater. I think the brackish water falls a little bit in the same category in that there's a huge volume of it. The questions remain in terms of, you know, how much can be exploited without either affecting, either economically or without affecting other resources. And I know that both Texas and New Mexico have very big programs looking at the brackish water. I was real interested. I saw a talk recently from somebody from Texas, and I was surprised they're not making big plans that they're going to all of a sudden have that brackish water in the next 10, 20 years. So I think there's a lot of questions still about it. There's also water quality issues in terms of scaling and things like that in desal plants, and what you do with the brine. So there's some environmental issues associated with it too. So it's definitely, it's great actually. I can say that without prejudice. I think that the Texas, New Mexico, USGS, and others are actually trying to get a handle on this resource, but still unsure how much can be used.
Okay. Now we've got, most of these questions are kind of specific areas now. This is a simple one. How can India address its groundwater depletion problem? From Ram Gupta.
Okay, well, I'm gonna tackle that one, Mike.
That's okay.
Yeah, you know, it's the water energy nexus in India, and farmers since the 70s, when they decided they were going to try to be self-sufficient in producing their own food, farmers incrementally were given subsidies on their electricity for pumping. And everywhere else, you get to a point where it's just no longer economical to pump groundwater. But in India, that hasn't been the situation. And, you know, in recent years, a lot of farmers are pumping virtually free. They're just not paying at all. They have a tremendous, powerful lobby. And so in certain states in India, they have been able to you know, oust the government that's in place, even though they're doing great in major economic issues, because they're threatening to try to get the farmers pumping under control by maybe charging them for electricity. We did in the book. We write pretty extensively about this problem, but also there are some good stories in India. Gujarat, Gandhi's native state, they've come a long way. They've done an amazing program of setting up two different systems, one for electric systems, which required just a massive effort of, you know, putting in power lines and poles and the whole thing, to put farmers on a separate system of electricity use, and it's made a major difference in kind of getting back their groundwater resource, but protecting it. So, you know, we'll see.
Okay, yeah. Okay, this one, another specific one. Can you comment on groundwater usage in Central and South America, especially with respect to the context of building climate resilience?
Well, you should answer that question, Mike.
Oh no!
You're not gonna let me off the hook. All right.
Well, no. You go ahead. I can fill in a few, but you guys, you're right. The experts.
So, all right. So, you know, climate is interesting in the sense that it could create more intense storms, which could create more recharge of groundwater, or it could also tend to, you know, also create more extremes, where all of a sudden you have more droughts. I think that we need to do a lot more thinking about, we tend to take groundwater for granted as being there when the dry periods are going to happen, and I think we need to do a lot more planning virtually everywhere in terms of thinking about how we use our groundwater resources, so we switch over to the extent we can to surface water during the wet periods, and use the groundwater more during the dry periods. And I think that would apply to Central America also. But
you know, and I think there's a lot of people that, of course, are on private wells and so on that depend on those wells. So, you know, if you have more extreme droughts in some areas, you may, with low groundwater storage, you may have problems.
That sounds good. And of course, South America has arguably the largest freshwater body in the world in the Guarani Aquifer, which underlies 4 countries, and I guess they have sort of an agreement about the management of the system, so it's not depleted. But that's quite impressive. My only experience in Central America, well, I was in Belize for 6 months in the mid-90s on a Fulbright, and despite the fact that Belize is, you know, perceived as a wet country, and a lot of it is, the northern 40% of Belize, formerly British Honduras, they pump groundwater, and they have a very presumably a good karst aquifer, much like the Edwards limestone or something like that, or Florida. But they, at the time, they had no idea of how much water was there, really how much they were using. I think that situation has changed, and they're actually paying more attention to quantifying how much groundwater they have. And from my work in Honduras, I don't really do much work with groundwater, but I know San Pedro Sula, which is the financial capital of the country, if not the administrative capital, produces like 70% of the country's GDP, and they pump a lot of groundwater within the city. And there it's an issue of they don't know how much they have, and I don't think there's really been a good assessment of how much groundwater is available. But there are some places where the water is good quality, and there's some places where it's like it looks like they're pumping dissolved limestone. That's hyperbole, but anyway. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag, but I'm not sure that climate resilience, I can't address that because they're still kind of sorting out, I think, at least I know in Honduras, what they're concerned about it, but they're still trying to figure out what they need to do. Yeah, right. The basics, yeah. Let's see. Do you think a water market system is a feasible method for managing groundwater similar to that in Australia?
You know, there's a lot of interest in that. A lot of the water markets, as I understand it, in Australia are really surface water, but they did include groundwater. The challenges with the water markets, I'm not an economist, but are couplefold. One is you got to have an open access system to information that's readily, so everybody can see it. And so that takes a lot of work. And I know there's a lot of interest in California in trying to develop water markets, and sort of a crude one there now, I think. The other issue, of course, is to make sure that your externalities, as economists would say, so that, you know, somebody's not selling groundwater that is effectively depleting somebody else's groundwater, their neighbor's groundwater, or causing land subsidence and so forth. So it's a little more challenging, I think, than surface water, but something that's definitely being pursued in different areas today, and was successfully used, I think, in Australia. There's also, I might add, a few differences between Australia and the United States in a couple areas. One is, an important one, is that they tend to share shortages, whereas at least in the Western United States, we have these prior appropriation systems where, you know, the last in line gets cut off first, and so that's a little different situation.
I also wanted to mention, this was from Abby, is it Pizel? Abby, there's an interesting experiment going on in Nevada right now in Diamond Valley, where they're unbundling water rights, and again, Diamond Valley relies pretty much on groundwater. There's an interesting concept by actually an Australian economist, the famous Mike Young, and if you go to my WaterWired blog, I think it was a week ago, I did a post on this about Mike Young's approach to that. So that's kind of interesting, and a lot of people are looking at that to see if that perhaps can be extended to other places. So I would encourage you to take a look there. So anyway, let's go back to the, okay. Thomas Howe would like to know, does your book look at the potential impacts of groundwater salinization for aquifers near coastal areas?
The simple answer is yes.
Okay.
So we have a couple histories there, a couple stories there. We talk about the actually Hilton Head and Savannah, Georgia, and the coast of Georgia as an area where saltwater intrusion has been a big issue. So we certainly include, and saltwater intrusion is certainly a big issue constraining groundwater use.
Okay. Boy, they're starting to, when it rains, it pours. It certainly does. Okay, let's see. My good friend John Wells, sound groundwater management requires that thought be given to prevention of new water demands. Do we have sufficient water metrics to connect our understanding of sustainable water use limits to land use decisions being made by local governments?
Well, the simple answer to that one is no, except in very unusual situations. Rosemarie mentioned the Santa Clara Valley and Orange County, and so there are some areas where they have very good information. And this is an area we actually emphasize at the end in terms of the importance of adequate data and data that's useful to local decision making. And it's hard to get people to maintain the funding, as you well know, for that kind of information. But it's really hard to. It's also hard to manage a system if you don't have that as backdrop. And I mentioned in the Bangkok case, one of the advantages was that they have a lot of data that they've collected from a long time. And the Denmark case that Rosemarie mentioned, they did water level monitoring program back in the 1950s and then water quality in the 1980s, and that information has been absolutely invaluable to them for making decisions about where land use decisions, even in the case of Denmark.
Okay. And address this to John, of course, still uses groundwater as 2 words. We're not going to mention who's responsible for making it 1 word. At least I won't. Anyway. Managed aquifer recharge has been used for conjunctive management of surface water and groundwater, for example, in the Central Arizona project. And do you see any challenges in implementing managed aquifer recharge projects? This is from Zuping Sheng again, from El Paso.
My understanding is that actually Arizona has developed quite, there are a lot of institutional issues in terms of being able to, for example, making sure that when you put the water underground, you're going to be able to get it back. And there are water quality issues. And so I think that actually Arizona, I think, is a very good example of somebody had to go look at in terms of trying to work through some of those issues. There are also, you got to have the right geology, and you've got to also consider the water quality implications. There are issues with mobilizing arsenic in some places or disinfection byproducts. So it's definitely something that people need to give more thought to and more emphasis to. And I know here in California, there's a large project undergoing with the UC Davis on trying to manage some of the surface water flooding that we have and recharge the water in the agricultural areas that have pumped down our groundwater basins. So, but I think there are definitely water quality and institutional issues that have to be worked through there.
Okay. And here's a statement. Actually, this is from Christine. It's been brought to our attention that the book discount code is not working. So obviously, some people are trying to buy your book. We'll look into that and we'll send around a working code. Again, we have all your email addresses. So, Christine, we'll get this straightened out and we'll send out that information so you can get the 25% discount. There's some questions here that are just too specific, and so I'm going to avoid asking those because it's like, why are the water levels in my well declining or something? There are a couple of those. Now, here's one. Do you have any advice for mega cities with respect to groundwater management practices? This is a little, for example, she cites the example of Manhattan, which no longer uses its groundwater pumps and has major flooding problems in its subway, requiring millions of gallons to be pumped out daily. So I don't know if you want to tackle that, but this is
Yeah, so the situations in mega cities differ. There are cities where you know, what I'll do is I'll give you a resource for that kind of information.
Okay, yeah.
There's an International Association of Hydrogeologists, and actually, the Water Bank put out a series of publications called GW-MATE, all capital letters, and they deal that Stephen Foster's kind of behind that, and they deal in a number of places with sort of some of the issues around megacities around the world in some of their publications. So they're very bold. Obviously, a big issue in cities is water quality. You know, because you've got lots of possibilities for contamination, and that's a huge issue. Another one is leaking. You know, associated with water quality, of course, is leaking sewers and problems with pathogens and things like that. So you got metals, you got pathogens, you got all kinds of issues potentially affecting your groundwater resource.
Okay. And this one falls in that same category. You might just give them a resource, but are you aware of wellhead protection area programs in U.S. states, which I know you are? Is there some place, you know, that you could cite that this person should go look for wellhead protection programs?
Sure. Yeah. So EPA, Office of Drinking Water and Groundwater, would be one, because they would administer it. So that's the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water in EPA. And also there's a group called the Source Water Collaborative, which is a whole bunch of different individuals, organizations that are kind of pushing for wellhead protection, source water protection issues. Because they were, as you know, maybe a decade or two ago, there was a lot of emphasis on mapping source water areas, wellhead protection areas, and so forth, and that's kind of fallen by the wayside. So nobody's really, there's certainly not a big effort across the country to try to update that information, but things have changed a lot over that period of time in terms of land use changes.
Okay. And you might also look at the National Groundwater Association, ngwa.org, possibly the Groundwater Protection Council in Oklahoma City.
Right, that's another. Both of those are good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know about the Groundwater Foundation. They may have some information on source water protection. But if you just, that's a interesting organization. But they may provide you with some more information. And let's see, I'm going through here, again, getting real specific here. Okay. How much of an issue has been made of limitations in assessment tools, e.g. groundwater models, in attempts to resolve groundwater problems around the globe?
Okay, let's see.
Where do you want to start?
Where do I start on that one? You know, there have been at various times big model comparison exercises where people have taken problems and then run different models to see how they do. And there have been a number of post audits of models, although I haven't seen as many recently, where people have gone back after modeling exercises have completed, made predictions, and seen how well they did. Usually, the biggest factor there is the fact that they didn't get the water use right. And then, of course, I always advocate that modeling is not something you do once, but you try to set yourself up so that you're actually integrating monitoring programs and redoing modeling, not necessarily for the same objectives, over time. So you're kind of building knowledge over time. So I guess that's just a few comments on that.
Okay, and we have another question. Actually, I think this is similar to one that was already asked. Have economic market methods been tried for improving the societal benefits from groundwater use or for conservation?
There are those that to economists that obviously look at those issues. I think a lot of them are probably in the agricultural arena. So, for example, there's an institute where you might find information about that in Nebraska. I can't think of the full name of it, but it's in the food it has food in the title, food and water, and they have done some economic type studies, I believe.
Okay.
And the next speaker on your webinar series, Sharon Megdal, is an economist.
Yes, that's right.
So save that question for Sharon, actually.
Yeah. Yes.
A real live economist to answer it.
Okay. And actually, that's a great suggestion, because economics, of course, we know how important they are. And it's not really the dismal science, as Carlisle said, and Sharon will prove that to you in about 4 weeks from now. So I think that's about it. Again, I'm going to delete the questions that are, can you help me with my well? So Bill can. If anybody can, it's Bill. So you should contact him. But I'm not sure he can answer it on this.
Actually, I should say NGWA does have, you can call in NGWA and ask questions too about individual well issues.
And Bill, forgive me, I forgot to mention that Bill is the Director of Science and Technology for the National Groundwater Association. So after he retired from the USGS, he's still in the groundwater racket, as we say, or the business. So anyway, I think that's about it. I would, again, not to be a shill for the book, but I will. And we'll get this business straightened out about the discount. But the book has a lot of useful information, and it is not a textbook type book. It is a book for what I like to call the intelligent layperson. And I'm a water professional, and I learned a lot from this book. And supposedly I knew this stuff, but I didn't. So that's my pitch. I'm not getting a residual or a consulting fee or anything. It's just an excellent book, and it's going to go a long way towards lifting the world's knowledge of groundwater and some of the issues that we have to face. So I've got 10 minutes past the hour by my clock. So Bill and Rosemary, I want to thank you for this, and to our participants, I apologize for the technical issues that we had and losing the sound and everything and the picture for a couple minutes, but we picked it up again, so this will all be on the recording when you get the link. And again, the two of you, I just want to thank you so much for all you've done, and I hope this isn't your last book. Maybe the viewers the participants can send in some suggestions. So anyway,
we're hard at work, Mike.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. So okay.
Well,
so
it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Thanks everybody at AWRA.
Okay, and again, thanks to all of you. And again, if you want to come back in a month, we'll have more groundwater, but we'll have it more from a perspective of groundwater governance and management with some specific examples in the U.S. And that's Sharon Megdal. I'm not sure Sharon's on the call today, but Sharon is just a fabulous resource. She is an economist. We forgive her for that because she's really a neat person. So you'll learn more about the economic and the management aspects of groundwater. So I hope to see you all and answer your questions. And if I skipped anybody, I apologize. So I'll see you again or hear you again a month from now. So have a good rest of the day. Yeah.
One thing I just wondering if the code, I haven't tried it, but it's capital Y, capital E, capital H, the number 20. I don't know if you had uppercase there, and if that makes a difference. Well,
I had a capital O, so that's interesting. You may try that, folks. Is try what, a 0 instead of an O, so H20.
Yeah.
So YEH and then the number 20 instead of.
I have uppercase for YEH. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Uppercase YEH. And then a capital.
You're too focused on H2O, Mike, obviously.
Well, because I was thinking it's oxygen, it's not 0, so that's why I put in the capital O. I'm sorry, I was thinking too hard. So again, you might try that and see if that works. And But anyway, we'll get that straightened out. From that's a good lesson for Yale University Press. You know, you got 0 and O and
0 and O
and I and L and blah blah blah. I know. Oh well. We'll get this. This is not beyond our ken. We can do this. Okay. So thanks very much, everybody.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.